That's her. With Mr. Morgan. I don't believe it. The file folder hit the marble table with a sharp crack that echoed through the ballroom. 150 pairs of eyes snapped toward Grace as she kept her hand firmly planted on the documents that would end her husband's career forever. A few yards away, Michael held his mistress's hand, completely oblivious that his world was about to be torn apart. But to understand how they arrived at this devastating moment, we must go back a few hours, to what seemed like a normal December evening. Steam from the shower clouded the vanity mirror as Grace Hamilton carefully applied her mascara, each stroke calculated with the precision of a woman who had learned to hide her true feelings behind a perfect smile. At 39, she still possessed the serene beauty that had captivated Michael 15 years ago, back when he was just a junior accountant with big dreams, and she was a recent public accounting graduate who believed in fairy tales. The two-story brownstone on the Upper East Side breathed opulence from every corner. The Italian furniture, original works of art, and marble finishes told the story of Michael Sullivan's professional ascent. He now held the coveted position of Chief Financial Officer at Morgan Construction, one of the most important development firms in the country. Everything Grace saw around her had been bought with her husband's sweat and ambition, but also, as she had recently discovered, with money that didn't belong to him. "Honey, are you almost ready?" Michael shouted from downstairs, his voice tinged with the impatience he'd developed over the past few months. Grace closed her eyes and took a deep breath before answering. "Almost done. I just need to pick out a dress." A lie. She had chosen the dress a week ago, an elegant black model from Theory that enhanced her figure without being too flashy. Every detail of this night had been planned with the meticulousness of a surgeon, including the fact that Michael would find the perfect excuse not to accompany her to his own company's holiday party. The sound of her husband's footsteps on the stairs pulled her from her thoughts. Michael appeared in the bathroom doorway, impeccably dressed in his navy Brooks Brothers suit, his hair slicked back with gel, and wearing the smile that once melted her but now made her nauseous. "Grace, I have some bad news," he began, feigning regret as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. "Mr. Reynolds just called. We have an urgent situation with the external auditors. I need to stay and sort this out." Grace continued applying her coral lipstick, watching her husband in the reflection. In 15 years of marriage, she had learned to read every gesture, every inflection in his voice, every little lie he thought went unnoticed. Mr. Reynolds was the company's comptroller, a 65-year-old man who never worked past 6 p.m., much less on a Friday night. "What a shame," she murmured, keeping her tone neutral. "I was so looking forward to us going together. We haven't gone out in months." "I know, my love. But you know how these things are. The numbers don't wait." The numbers. How ironic. If only he knew that she had been very carefully reviewing certain numbers for the last 6 weeks. Michael walked over and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek, careful not to smudge her makeup. "You should probably just stay home, watch a movie, relax. I'll try to get home early." "Actually, I think I'll still go," Grace replied, turning to look him directly in the eye. "Edward Morgan invited me personally when we ran into each other at Whole Foods last week. It would be rude not to show up." Michael's expression shifted imperceptibly. A flash of panic crossed his eyes before he could control it. "Edward Morgan, the CEO." "Yes, funny you should know him," Grace said with an innocent smile. "He told me he'd heard a lot about me and would like to get to know me better. He even mentioned something about a job proposal." Michael stood frozen for a few seconds. In his mind, he was rapidly calculating the possibilities, the risks, the consequences of his wife showing up at the party when he planned to arrive with Sophia on his arm. "I don't think that's a good idea, Grace. You know how these corporate parties are lots of booze, boring work talk. You'll feel out of place." "Michael, I'm a CPA with a master's in corporate finance. I'll hardly feel out of place talking about work." The comment hit exactly where she knew it would hurt. For the last 5 years, Michael had consistently minimized his wife's professional achievements, subtly suggesting she should focus on the home while he handled the successful career. He had never cared that Grace had graduated with honors or had worked at 2 of the most prestigious audit firms in the country before deciding to reduce her workload to dedicate more time to their marriage. "Please, just stay home," he insisted, this time in a firmer tone. "I promise we'll go together next year." Grace pretended to consider his request as she finished arranging her hair. In reality, she was certain she would attend that party, but she needed Michael to believe he had convinced her to stay home. It was part of the plan. "All right," she sighed finally. "You're right. I'll stay here and make something nice for when you get back." The relief on Michael's face was so obvious it was almost comical. He approached her again and hugged her from behind as they both looked at their reflection in the vanity mirror. "You're the best wife in the world, you know that?" "The biggest fool, you mean," Grace thought, but she smiled sweetly. "I just want you to have a quiet, worry-free night." Michael checked his watch, a Rolex Submariner he had bought the previous month, which, by her calculations, had cost approximately 3 months of his official salary. Another detail that hadn't escaped her notice. "Well, I'm off. The meeting's at 8:30. At the office?" "Yes, at the office. Reynolds wants to review all the financial statements from the last quarter before the auditors arrive on Monday." Lie after lie, woven with the ease of someone who had completely lost all sense of shame. Grace knew perfectly well there was no meeting, that the external auditors weren't due until January, and that Mr. Reynolds was, at that very moment, having dinner with his wife at their home in Scarsdale, as he did every Friday for as long as she could remember. "Drive safe," she said as he went downstairs. "I always do. I love you. I love you too." The last words left her mouth with a bitter taste. When was the last time she had truly felt love for him? Was it before she discovered the receipts for the apartment in Greenwich Village? Or before she found the pictures on his phone? Or perhaps before she realized the deposits in his personal account didn't match his declared income? The sound of the front door closing released her from her performance. Grace sank into the vanity chair and studied her reflection. The woman looking back at her was no longer the same one who had married Michael 15 years ago, full of illusions and shared plans. This woman had learned to investigate, to document, to plan. She stood and walked to the closet, where the black dress she had so carefully chosen was hanging. It was not the kind of outfit one wore to stay home and watch television. It was the uniform of a woman about to change her life forever. Her phone vibrated on the dresser, a text from a number she knew well, but had saved under the name IT support to avoid suspicion. "Everything is ready for tonight. The package is prepared, confirming rendezvous at 9:15. Grace smiled for the first time all day as she typed her reply. "Confirmed. See you in the parking garage." The next 2 hours were a symphony of calculated preparations. Grace showered again, this time taking her time to enjoy every minute of the hot water. She applied a facial mask, painted her nails a deep shade of red, and styled her hair in soft waves that elegantly framed her face. As she dressed, her mind replayed the events that had led her to this moment. It had all started 6 months ago, when Michael began coming home late more frequently. At first, Grace had genuinely believed his excuses about important projects and urgent meetings. After all, he had worked hard for years to get where he was, but the lies grew more elaborate and less believable. The whispered phone calls he'd abruptly end when she entered the room. The business trips that didn't appear on the company calendar she could access as the wife of a senior employee. The inexplicable charges on the credit card statements. The breaking point had come one Tuesday morning when Michael, rushing out for a supposed early meeting, forgot his phone at home. The device had rung insistently for 20 minutes until Grace, worried it might be a work emergency, decided to answer. "Baby," a young, sweet female voice had answered. "Why weren't you picking up? I'm already at the apartment waiting for you." Grace had hung up without a word, but that moment had marked the end of her marriage and the beginning of her investigation. Because if there was one thing she had learned from her years in auditing, it was that where there's one irregularity, there are usually many more. It had taken her 3 weeks to identify the owner of the voice, Sophia Miller, 26 years old, an administrative assistant in the Human Resources Department at Morgan Construction. Pretty, young, ambitious, and apparently very willing to get involved with married men in positions of power. But Grace hadn't stopped at uncovering the infidelity. Her auditor's instincts told her there was something bigger behind it all, and she was right. The unexplained expenses led her to discover irregular transfers from company accounts to Michael's personal accounts. The romantic trips to Miami Beach, the expensive jewelry, the apartment in the village where he met Sophia, It had all been financed with money that wasn't his. The evidence had been relatively easy to obtain. Michael, confident in his position and certain his wife would never suspect him, had been careless with his digital trail. The receipts saved in his wallet, the photos on his phone, the financial documents he left on his desk at home, all of it had been meticulously documented and photographed by Grace for weeks. But the final piece of the puzzle had arrived unexpectedly. 2 weeks ago, while grocery shopping at Whole Foods, she had run into Edward Morgan, the CEO of Morgan Construction, and technically her husband's boss. Edward was an imposing man of 55, with perfectly coiffed gray hair and the kind of presence only developed by those who have built empires from scratch. Grace knew him by sight from photos in the company offices and the few holiday parties she had attended in previous years, but she had never spoken to him directly. "You're Grace, aren't you?" he had said, approaching her with a genuine smile. "Michael Sullivan's wife." "Yes, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Morgan." "Edward, please. I've heard a lot about you. Michael always mentions you're an accountant, right?" The conversation had flowed naturally. Edward turned out to be surprisingly approachable and genuinely interested in learning more about Grace's professional background. When she mentioned her experience in external auditing, the businessman's eyes had lit up. "We were just looking for someone with your profile for a special project," he'd remarked. "Would you be interested in an external consulting role? We could discuss it in more detail at the holiday party." That was the moment when all the elements of her plan had perfectly aligned. The direct invitation from the CEO gave her the perfect excuse to attend the party, and the job proposal provided the ideal platform to present her evidence. Now, as she put on the pearl earrings that had been a wedding gift from her mother-in-law, Grace felt a mix of nervousness and determination coursing through her veins. Tonight, she would not only confront her husband's infidelity, she would publicly unmask his betrayal and his corruption in front of the entire company. Her phone rang again. This time, it was a call. "Mrs. Hamilton?" "Yes, this is she." "This is Richard Vance from Corporate Investigations. We have all the documentation ready, the apartment lease, bank records, wire transfers. It's all in the file we'll be delivering tonight." "Perfect. And the photographs?" "We have dated images from the last 6 weeks, confirming the relationship between Mr. Sullivan and Miss Miller, as well as their use of the apartment funded by the company." Grace closed her eyes. A part of her had secretly hoped the private investigator would find nothing, that her suspicions were the product of a paranoid imagination, but the reality was undeniable. "What time shall we meet?" 9:15, in the hotel parking garage, sub-level 2, by the elevator. "I'll be there." She hung up and gave herself one last look in the full-length mirror. The black dress made her look elegant, but not ostentatious. Professional, but not intimidating. It was exactly the image she needed to project tonight. A woman ready for business. She grabbed her clutch, checking that she had everything she needed: ID, credit cards, a fully charged phone, and a small digital recorder she had bought specifically for this occasion. If everything went according to plan, tonight would be etched in the history of Morgan Construction as the night corruption came to light. As she walked down the stairs of her home, Grace thought of all the nights she had spent alone over the last few months, preparing dinner for a husband who came home late, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers, making up increasingly elaborate excuses. She thought of all the times she had pretended to believe his lies to keep the peace, to preserve the image of the perfect marriage they had built for 15 years. That submissive, complacent woman had died the day she answered Michael's phone. The woman now walking toward the garage was someone entirely different, someone who had reclaimed her strength, her intelligence, and, above all, her dignity. The white Lexus ES started smoothly as she pulled out of the garage. Grace took one last look at the house where she had lived for the last 8 years. She knew that, regardless of what happened tonight, nothing would ever be the same. With an enigmatic smile forming on her lips, she drove toward the hotel where the party was being held, where Michael was unknowingly waiting for her, and where his life would change forever. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered under the golden light of crystal chandeliers. Silver and gold balloons hung strategically from the ceiling, while round tables covered in white linen created an elegant atmosphere that reflected the success of Morgan Construction. Soft music filled the space where more than 200 employees had already gathered, from top executives to administrative assistants, all dressed in their finest to celebrate the close of an extraordinarily successful year. Michael Sullivan adjusted his silk Italian tie as he waited in the hotel lobby. He had arrived 15 minutes early, not out of punctuality, but out of nervousness. The entire drive from his home to the hotel, he had mentally rehearsed every detail of his plan. Grace would be at home, probably already in her pajamas, watching some romantic movie, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. A taxi pulled up to the main entrance, and out stepped Sophia Miller, wearing a tight red dress that highlighted every curve of her youthful figure. Her 4-inch black heels made her walk with a calculated sensuality that didn't go unnoticed by any man in the vicinity. Her dyed blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her bare shoulders, and her makeup had been applied with professional precision. Ready to make history? Michael whispered in her ear as she approached, the scent of her French perfume mixing with the crisp night air. "I'm nervous," Sophia admitted, adjusting the tiny clutch that could barely hold her phone and lipstick. "Are you absolutely sure she's not coming?" "I guarantee it. Grace is as predictable as a clock. By this time, she's in bed with a cup of tea and some boring novel." Michael took Sophia's hand, lacing his fingers with hers. The wedding ring on his left hand gleamed under the lobby lights, a metallic reminder of the betrayal he was about to make public. "Besides," he continued with an arrogant smirk, "even if she came, what could she do? Stand in a corner while I enjoy myself with the woman who actually makes me happy?" The couple entered the ballroom hand in hand, and the effect was immediate. Conversations gradually halted as employees began to recognize Michael, the respected CFO, accompanied by someone who was definitely not his wife. Murmurs spread like ripples in a pond, propagating from table to table with the speed of corporate gossip. "Is that Sophia from HR?" the legal department secretary whispered to her table-mate. "Yes, and that's definitely Michael Sullivan. Where's his wife?" "I have no idea, but this is going to be very interesting." Michael, far from being intimidated by the stares, seemed to feed on the attention. He had worked for 15 years to reach this level in the company. He had sacrificed nights and weekends. He had endured the constant pressure of numbers and audits. Now, he finally felt free to show the world he was a successful man who could afford any luxury, including a young and beautiful mistress. "Let's go say hi to some people," he said to Sophia, guiding her toward the bar where several mid-level executives were gathered. "Good evening, Michael." Rob Green, the sales manager, greeted him with a forced smile. "You look well accompanied tonight." "Rob, I'd like you to meet Sophia Miller." "Sophia, this is Rob, one of our top salesmen." Sophia extended her hand with calculated elegance, smiling with that mix of shyness and coquetry she had perfected over the months. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Green. Michael has told me so much about the success of the sales department." Rob shook her hand briefly, his expression clearly showing his discomfort. He had known Grace for years. He had dined at the Sullivans' home on multiple occasions, and now found himself in the awkward position of being a silent accomplice to this situation. "And Grace couldn't join you tonight?" Rob asked, deciding to address the elephant in the room directly. Michael's smile widened as if he had been waiting for that exact question. "Grace preferred to stay home. You know how she is, a real homebody. These parties aren't really her scene." The lie rolled off his tongue with an ease that surprised even Sophia. During the months they had been dating, she had heard Michael describe his wife as a boring woman with no ambition, who had settled for being a housewife after a few years, working in unimportant jobs. "I see," Rob mumbled, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, enjoy the party." He quickly walked away, but Michael didn't seem to notice or care about the cold farewell. In his mind, he was writing the perfect narrative, the successful executive who had overcome the limitations of a passionless marriage to find true happiness with a woman who truly understood and valued him. The music shifted to a faster rhythm, and Michael led Sophia to the dance floor. Other employees watched them from their tables, some with poorly concealed curiosity, others with open disapproval. The executives' wives exchanged meaningful glances, while the younger employees seemed fascinated by the drama unfolding before their eyes. "Michael, maybe we should be more discreet," Sophia suggested as they danced. People are staring at us a lot. Let them stare, he replied, pulling her closer to his body. It's time everyone knew I'm a man free to live my life as I please. At a table near the dance floor, 3 junior partners of the firm watched the scene with growing annoyance. Charles Morgan, Edward Morgan's older brother, and the vice president of operations, sipped his whiskey slowly while keeping his eyes fixed on the couple. "This is completely inappropriate," he muttered to his colleagues. "It's one thing to have marital problems, but it's another thing entirely to make a public spectacle at the company party." "Do you know his wife?" asked Patricia Vance, the director of human resources and one of the few women on the executive board. "Yes, Grace is a lovely woman, intelligent, educated, always very gracious at social events. She doesn't deserve this public humiliation." "And the girl?" inquired the third partner, George Reynolds. "Sophia Miller. Administrative assistant, 26, average performance, nothing extraordinary. What bothers me is that Michael is using his position of power to influence a subordinate employee." Patricia nodded gravely. As HR director, situations like this were a potential nightmare in terms of corporate policy and possible lawsuits. "I'm going to have to document this," she said, discreetly taking out her phone to take a few pictures. "If this becomes a legal issue, we'll need evidence." Meanwhile, on the dance floor, Michael was completely in his element. The music, the lights, the attention of everyone presented, all served to feed his inflated ego. When the song ended, he decided it was the perfect moment to make an even more dramatic statement. Without warning, he took Sophia's face in his hands and kissed her passionately, a long, deep kiss that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath during those seconds that felt like an eternity. The kiss finally ended, but the damage was done. A general murmur spread throughout the room like an uncontrolled fire. Some of the executives' wives looked genuinely offended, while other employees simply couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. "Did he seriously just do that?" exclaimed a voice from a nearby table. "That man has completely lost his mind," another commented. Michael, completely oblivious to the consternation he had caused, smiled triumphantly as he guided Sophia back toward the bar. In his distorted mind, he interpreted the reactions as envy from men who didn't have the courage to live their lives with the same freedom he did. "Did you see their faces?" he whispered to Sophia. "They're all dying of jealousy. Everyone here is trapped in boring marriages, doing what society expects of them." Sophia, however, was beginning to feel the weight of the disapproving stares. Until this moment, her relationship with Michael had been secret, limited to discreet encounters in the apartment he had rented for her. This public exposure made her feel vulnerable and uncomfortable. "Michael, I think maybe," she began, but he cut her off. "Don't worry about them. Tomorrow they'll be talking about something else. Besides, what can they do? I'm the CFO. Edward needs me." His arrogance was so palpable that several employees passing by could hear his comments. The situation was becoming increasingly tense, especially when Michael decided to raise the level of provocation even higher. "Rob!" he shouted upon seeing the sales manager pass by again. "Come here, I want to tell you something funny." Rob approached reluctantly, hoping the conversation would be brief. "You know what the funniest part of all this is?" Michael continued, clearly affected by the alcohol. "Grace probably thinks I'm at the office reviewing boring numbers with Reynolds. She has no idea I'm here with the most beautiful woman at the party." "Michael, maybe you should." Rob tried to intervene. "No," he interrupted. "I'm tired of pretending. 15 years married to a woman who settled for being mediocre. Do you know the last time Grace and I had an interesting conversation? The last time she did something that surprised me?" The words came out of his mouth like venom, each sentence crueler than the last. Sophia looked at him with a mixture of astonishment and concern, beginning to realize that the man she had fallen in love with might not be who she thought he was. "Grace is a good woman," Rob said firmly, "and she doesn't deserve you talking about her like that." "A good woman?" Michael laughed. "Rob, Grace is the perfect example of what I don't want in my life. No ambition, no passion, no dreams. She wakes up every morning to do the exact same thing she did the day before. That's enough." The voice came from a nearby table where Mary Ellen Reynolds, the comptroller's wife, had abruptly stood up. She was a woman in her 60s who had known Grace for over a decade and could not tolerate hearing such disparaging comments. "Grace Hamilton is one of the most intelligent and professional women I know," she declared, her voice loud enough for several tables to hear. "She's a certified public accountant. She has a master's in finance and worked at prestigious audit firms before reducing her workload." The comment hit Michael like a slap in the face. For years, he had managed to minimize his wife's professional achievements, even to himself, building a narrative where he was the only successful one in the relationship. "That was years ago," he retorted weakly. "Now she only takes care of the house because you convinced her to," Mary Ellen continued, her voice filled with indignation. "Grace sacrificed her career to support yours, and this is how you repay her." A circle of tension had formed around the confrontation. Other employees drew closer, some to support Mary Ellen, others simply to witness the unfolding drama. Sophia, completely overwhelmed by the situation, discreetly tried to pull on Michael's sleeve to get him away from the conflict. "Mary Ellen, with all due respect, you don't know what you're talking about," Michael said, his voice becoming more aggressive. "My marriage is my business." "Your marriage stopped being just your business the moment you decided to publicly humiliate your wife at the company party," retorted Patricia Vance, joining the conversation from her table. "As the Director of Human Resources, I am warning you that this behavior is completely inappropriate." The situation was spiraling out of control rapidly. Younger employees were discreetly recording with their phones, while senior executives exchanged worried glances. This kind of scandal was exactly what the company didn't need, especially at an event meant to celebrate its achievements for the year. Michael, feeling cornered but refusing to back down, decided to double down. "You know what?" he yelled, his voice cutting through the music. "I'm proud to be here with Sophia. She represents everything a successful man like me deserves. Youth, beauty, ambition, qualities I frankly haven't seen in my house for years." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the musicians seemed to have lowered the volume, as if sensing the tension that had gripped the room. Sophia finally couldn't take the pressure anymore. "Michael, please, let's go," she pleaded, taking his arm. "This is getting very uncomfortable." But he was too drunk on his own spectacle to stop now. In his distorted mind, he believed he was having his moment of glory, the moment he would finally show the world he was a free and powerful man. The main door to the ballroom opened silently, but no one noticed amidst the unfolding drama. A black BMW had arrived in the hotel's valet, followed closely by a late-model silver Mercedes. The engines were cut, and the doors closed with the solid sound that only luxury cars produce. In the hotel lobby, two elegant figures were heading toward the ballroom, their firm and determined steps echoing against the marble floor. One of them carried a black leather briefcase, while the other adjusted the cuffs of his designer suit. Inside the ballroom, Michael continued his show, completely unaware that his world was about to change forever. The double doors of the ballroom swung open with a silent elegance that contrasted dramatically with the scandal unfolding inside. The first to cross the threshold was Grace Hamilton, her black dress flowing gently as she walked with the grace of a woman who had found her power. At her side, with a presence that commanded immediate respect, Edward Morgan looked impeccable in his dark gray Armani suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, and an expression of absolute confidence on his face. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Conversation stopped as if someone had flipped a universal silence switch. The employees, who moments before had been engrossed in the drama of Michael and his mistress, turned their heads toward the entrance, immediately recognizing the imposing figure of the man who controlled their professional destinies. The CEO of Morgan Construction was not someone who frequently appeared at social events, and his presence at the holiday party was as unexpected as it was significant. Michael Sullivan felt the blood drain from his face. His eyes locked on the couple advancing through the room, and his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Grace, his supposedly predictable wife, who should have been at home watching television, was walking on the arm of his ultimate boss with an elegance he couldn't remember ever seeing. The black dress she was wearing was not the kind of attire she used for staying in, and her makeup was applied with a perfection that spoke of meticulous preparation. "Is that your wife?" Sophia whispered, her voice trembling as she recognized the gravity of the situation. Michael couldn't answer. His throat had closed completely, as if an invisible hand were strangling him. The alcohol he had consumed throughout the night now worked against him, making his mind function more slowly than needed to process the impending catastrophe. Edward Morgan guided Grace to the center of the room with the natural ease of someone accustomed to being the center of attention wherever he went. His smile was genuine and warm, that of a man who had found exactly what he was looking for. The employees began to form a natural semicircle around them, some moved by curiosity, others by a corporate instinct to show respect to the top boss. "Good evening, everyone," Edward said, his voice clear and powerful, needing no amplification to be heard in every corner of the room. "I hope you are enjoying this well-deserved celebration after an extraordinary year for our company." Applause started spontaneously, timid at first, then growing in intensity as more employees joined in. Grace smiled cordially, tilting her head slightly in acknowledgement, but maintained a professional composure that impressed everyone present. "I want to take this opportunity," Edward continued, "to officially introduce someone very special. This is Grace Hamilton, and starting next Monday, she will be joining our team as the Director of External Audits." The murmur that followed was like the roar of a distant ocean. Employees exchanged looks of surprise, some recognizing the last name and making the immediate connection to Michael. Patricia Vance, the HR director, smiled with genuine satisfaction, recalling the argument she'd had minutes before about Grace's professional credentials. "Some of you already know Grace as the wife of our chief financial officer." Edward paused deliberately, allowing his words to settle in the tense atmosphere. "But what you may not know is that Grace is a certified public accountant with a master's in corporate finance, a magna cum laude graduate of NYU's Stern School of Business. She worked for 6 years at Deloitte & Touche, where she specialized in forensic audits for major corporations." Every word out of Edward's mouth was like a hammer blow to Michael's inflated ego. For years, he had minimized his wife's achievements, allowing others to believe she was simply a housewife with no professional ambitions. Now, in front of the entire company, the truth about the impressive credentials of the woman he had so cruelly underestimated was being revealed. "Furthermore," Edward continued, clearly enjoying the moment, "Grace has recently completed a specialization in investigating financial irregularities. Her skills will be invaluable in maintaining the highest standards of transparency in our operations." The applause erupted again, this time more prolonged and enthusiastic. Mary Ellen Reynolds, who had defended Grace minutes earlier, clapped with particular vigor, casting significant glances toward where Michael stood paralyzed. Other employees who had witnessed the CFO's derogatory comments now understood the cruel irony of the situation. Grace stepped forward with a professional smile that radiated confidence and determination. "Thank you all for the warm welcome," she said, her voice clear and firm, reaching every corner of the room. "I am excited to join a company with the reputation and ethical values of Morgan Construction. I hope to contribute significantly to the growth and transparency of its financial operations." Her words were carefully chosen, each syllable pronounced with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The specific mention of transparency and ethical values did not go unnoticed by the more experienced executives, who began to exchange meaningful looks. Michael finally managed to regain some of his composure. Although sweat had started to form small beads on his forehead, the reality of the situation was beginning to seep through the fog of alcohol and shock. His wife had not only appeared at the party he thought she would avoid, but she had arrived with the most powerful man in the company and had apparently landed a job that would place her in a supervisory position over the company's finances. Sophia, for her part, had begun to discreetly distance herself from Michael, pretending to look for the restroom or the bar. Her survival instinct told her that being associated with him at this moment was not a good idea for her career. As a mid-level employee in HR, she understood better than anyone the political implications of what she was witnessing. "Aren't you going to greet your wife?" Rob Green murmured as he passed by Michael, his tone laden with an irony he couldn't hide. Michael wanted to respond, but the words refused to leave his throat. From his position, he could clearly see Grace conversing animatedly with several executives who had approached to congratulate her on her new role. The woman he knew as shy and withdrawn at social events was now glowing with a professional confidence that made her look completely different. Mr. Sullivan." Edward Morgan's voice cut through his thoughts like a knife. "Aren't you going to come and greet your wife?" All eyes in the room turned to Michael, who suddenly felt like a cornered animal. Edward had called him from across the room, his voice loud enough to ensure everyone heard the invitation. There was no way to avoid the encounter without appearing rude in front of his ultimate boss. With steps that felt like he was walking to his own execution, Michael made his way toward where Edward and Grace were standing. His legs seemed to move independently of his will, each step requiring a conscious effort to maintain his balance. "Edward, what a surprise to see you here," he finally managed to say, extending a trembling hand toward his boss. "Michael," Edward replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "your wife has made an extraordinary impression on me. It's clear you have excellent taste in choosing a life partner." The irony of the situation was so palpable that several employees had to stifle nervous laughter. Michael, who minutes before had been publicly proclaiming his disdain for his wife, was now forced to receive compliments about her from his own boss. "Yes, she's very special," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact with his wife. Grace, for her part, maintained a perfectly professional smile, as if nothing extraordinary were happening. She was the picture of elegant composure, showing a side of herself that had remained hidden during years of a marriage where she had allowed Michael to overshadow her brilliance. "Michael has told me so much about your work at the company," Grace said, her voice sweet but with an undertone only he could detect. "I'm eager to learn more details about the financial operations. I'm sure we'll have many opportunities to collaborate closely." The words "collaborate" closely echoed in Michael's ears like a thinly veiled threat. His mind, finally clearing from the initial shock, began to process the full implications of the situation. If Grace worked in external audits, she would have access to all of the company's financial records, including those he had hoped to keep secret forever. "Of course," he managed to reply, his voice sounding strange even to himself. We'll be in touch." Edward observed the exchange with a neutral expression, but his experienced eyes missed none of the palpable tension between the couple. As a successful businessman, he had developed a keen instinct for sensing when something was amiss, and the dynamic between Michael and Grace was definitely setting off all his internal alarms. "Well," Edward said, breaking the awkward silence, "I think it's time for a more formal announcement. Could someone get me a microphone?" Patricia Vance hurried to fulfill the request, handing him the wireless microphone they had used for the initial toasts of the evening. Edward took it naturally, waiting a few seconds until the music stopped and he had the full attention of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," his amplified voice filled every corner of the space. "As you know, the success of Morgan Construction is built on 3 fundamental pillars: innovation, quality, and absolute transparency. Tonight, I want to talk specifically about that 3rd pillar." An expectant silence fell over the room. The employees had moved closer, forming a tighter circle around the CEO, while Michael remained motionless, feeling as if the floor beneath his feet were slowly crumbling. "Transparency isn't just a pretty word we put in our marketing materials," Edward continued. "It's a sacred commitment to our clients, our investors, and most importantly, to each and every one of you who trust this company for your livelihood and that of your families." Grace maintained her position next to Edward, but her eyes had found her husband's for the first time that night. The look they exchanged lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough for Michael to understand that he had completely underestimated the woman he had been married to for 15 years. "That is why," Edward raised his voice, "I am pleased to announce that as part of our renewed commitment to total transparency, we have decided to implement a full external audit of all our financial operations under the direction of Mrs. Grace Hamilton." The applause erupted again, but this time Michael heard it as if from a great distance. His mind was racing 1,000 miles an hour, calculating dates, mentally reviewing transactions, trying to remember how careful he had been in covering his digital tracks. "This audit," Edward continued as the applause subsided, "is not a reactive measure to any problem. It is a proactive measure to ensure that we continue to be the example of corporate integrity that our clients expect from us." The choice of words was deliberate and precise. Edward had mentioned corporate integrity while maintaining direct eye contact with Michael, sending a message that required no interpretation. Michael felt the walls of the ballroom closing in on him. Every congratulatory smile directed at Grace, every round of applause, every word from Edward, it all seemed part of a cosmic conspiracy, designed specifically to destroy the world he had so carefully built over the years. At the back of the room, Sophia had found refuge at a table occupied by employees of her level, pretending to be fascinated by a conversation about vacation plans. From there, she watched the events unfold with a mixture of fascination and terror, beginning to understand that the man she had been dating was perhaps not the powerful, untouchable executive she had believed him to be. Edward finally returned the microphone to Patricia, but kept his central position in the room, clearly enjoying being the center of attention in what promised to be a memorable night for all present. "Well," he said, turning specifically to Grace, "would you like to say a few words about your new position?" Grace accepted the microphone with steady hands, and for the first time all night, Michael saw a glint in her eyes of something that filled him with absolute terror, relentless determination. The woman he had underestimated for so many years was about to speak, and he had the horrible certainty that her next words would change everything forever. Grace took the microphone with steady hands, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes fixed on her. The silence in the ballroom was so profound, you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. For 15 years, she had remained in the shadows, the quiet wife who smiled cordially at social events while her husband shone in the spotlight. Tonight, it was finally her turn to speak. "Thank you all for this warm welcome," she began, her voice clear and professional. "As Mr. Morgan mentioned, my joining Morgan Construction as Director of External Audits represents a renewed commitment to absolute transparency." Michael watched from his position, feeling as though he were watching his own execution in slow motion. Every word that left his wife's lips sounded like a professional death sentence. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to maintain a neutral expression, but the sweat trickling down his back betrayed his mental state. "Over the past few weeks," Grace continued, "I have had the opportunity to conduct a preliminary audit of certain aspects of the company's financial operations. Mr. Morgan requested this review as part of the selection process for my new position." Edward nodded gravely, maintaining a serious expression that signaled the importance of what was about to be revealed. The senior executives in the room exchanged worried glances, sensing that something significant was about to come to light. Unfortunately, Grace paused deliberately, allowing the tension to build. "During this preliminary audit, I have discovered financial irregularities that require immediate attention and corrective action." A collective gasp swept through the room like a shockwave. Employees looked at each other with expressions of surprise and concern, while the firm's partners adopted more alert postures, preparing to hear details that could affect the reputation and stability of Morgan Construction. Patricia Vance discreetly approached Grace, handing her a black leather briefcase she had been holding since her arrival. The simple act of receiving that briefcase was like detonating a silent bomb in Michael's brain as he finally understood that everything had been meticulously planned. "The evidence I am about to present tonight," Grace said, opening the briefcase, "documents the misuse of corporate funds in an amount exceeding $500,000 over the last 18 months. The silence that followed was deafening. $500,000 was an amount no company could afford to lose, especially when that loss represented direct fraud. The senior partners of Morgan Construction adopted expressions of extreme gravity, while the lower-level employees simply couldn't believe what they were hearing. Specifically, Grace extracted a series of documents from the briefcase. These funds were transferred from the company's operating accounts to personal accounts and subsequently used for expenses of a personal nature, including the lease of an apartment in Greenwich Village, recreational trips to tourist destinations, and the purchase of luxury goods. Michael felt the world collapsing around him. Every document Grace displayed was like a direct stab at his career, his reputation, and his future. The precision with which she had documented his transgressions was devastating, showing a level of preparation he had never imagined possible. Among the documentary evidence, Grace continued in a firm voice, "We have receipts from the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach for a romantic weekend valued at $10,000, charged directly to the company's executive expense account." Sophia, from her refuge at the back table, felt her blood run cold. That weekend in Miami had been the most romantic moment of her relationship with Michael, when he had promised he would leave his wife and they would build a life together. Now she realized that entire fantasy had been financed with stolen money. We also have, Grace pulled out another set of documents, receipts from Cartier for a diamond necklace valued at $15,000 and matching earrings for an additional $10,000, all charged as corporate entertainment expenses. The jewelry Sophia was wearing that very night suddenly felt like burning shackles around her neck and ears. Every piece she had believed was a token of Michael's love was now revealed as evidence of her unwitting participation in a corporate fraud scheme. Edward took one of the documents Grace handed him, examining it briefly before addressing the audience again. The bank transfers supporting these purchases have been traced and verified by independent financial investigators, he announced gravely. The evidence is irrefutable and has been handed over to both our legal department and the relevant authorities. Michael finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate croak. Wait, this is a misunderstanding. I can explain every one of those transactions. His desperate exclamation only served to draw more attention to him. Everyone present turned to look at him, some with expressions of pity, others with open disgust. The image of the successful, confident executive had completely crumbled, revealing a desperate, cornered man. Michael, Edward said coldly, you will have the opportunity to explain these transactions to our legal team and the external auditors tomorrow morning. Tonight, however, your presence at this celebration is no longer appropriate. Grace pulled one last document from the briefcase, and this time her smile took on a shade of personal satisfaction that very few could detect. Finally, she announced, we have the lease agreement for the apartment located at 25 Bleecker Street, Greenwich Village, leased under the company's name, but used exclusively for the personal purposes of Mr. Sullivan. The specific mention of the address was the final blow. Sophia immediately recognized her own home. The little haven she had believed was her shared home with Michael. Now she understood that even that intimate space had been an illusion built with someone else's money. Unable to bear the public humiliation any longer, Sophia stood up from her table and walked swiftly toward the exit, her heels clicking like hammer blows against the marble floor. Her hasty departure did not go unnoticed by anyone and served to underscore the magnitude of the unfolding scandal. "Sophia! Wait!" Michael shouted, but she had disappeared through the ballroom doors without looking back. Charles Morgan, the VP of Operations, approached Edward with a grave expression. "Edward, I think we need to handle this situation immediately and definitively," he murmured, his voice low but loud enough for nearby employees to hear. "I completely agree," Edward replied. "Michael, I am asking you to leave these premises immediately. As of this moment, you are suspended from all your duties while the formal investigation is completed." The public declaration of suspension was like a lightning bolt that fully illuminated the situation. Michael was no longer just an employee in trouble, he was a corporate criminal who had been unmasked in front of the entire company. "You can't do this," Michael protested, his voice breaking with desperation. "I've worked for this company for 15 years. I've contributed to the growth and success of Morgan Construction. You've also stolen $500,000 from our operating accounts," Patricia Vance retorted with professional coolness. "Those contributions are no longer relevant in the face of this evidence of fraud." Edward made a discreet signal toward the entrance of the ballroom, where 2 security guards had silently appeared. Their presence was intimidating yet professional, dressed in dark suits that made them look more like executives than security personnel. "Mr. Sullivan," one of the guards said, approaching respectfully, "we need you to accompany us to retrieve your personal belongings from the office." The final humiliation was being executed with surgical precision. Michael wasn't just being fired, he was being escorted out of the building like a common criminal. The employees who had been his subordinates for years now watched him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Grace," Michael muttered, turning to his wife with pleading eyes. "Please, we can talk about this in private. We're married. We have 15 years together." For the first time all night, Grace looked him directly in the eyes. Her expression showed no anger or pain, but something far more devastating, complete indifference. "Michael," she said quietly, Those 15 years ended the morning I answered your phone and heard your mistress asking why you hadn't arrived at the apartment you paid for with stolen money." Her words cut through the air like blades, revealing not only the exact moment their marriage had died, but also confirming that she had been aware of everything for much longer than he had imagined. The security guards positioned themselves discreetly on either side of Michael, waiting for the right moment to escort him to the exit. Their professional yet firm presence made it clear that the situation was past the point of negotiation. "This can't be happening," Michael yelled, completely losing his composure. "Grace, you're my wife. You can't destroy my career for personal revenge." "I haven't destroyed your career for revenge," Grace replied with absolute calm. "I have documented your destruction of your own career through criminal decisions. The difference is fundamental." Edward intervened before the situation could escalate further. "Michael, it's time for you to leave. Tomorrow, you can present your side of the story to our lawyers, but tonight, the evidence speaks for itself." The security guards took a step forward, flanking Michael professionally but unequivocally. The message was clear. He could walk to the exit with dignity, or he could be escorted out in a less elegant manner. Michael took one last look around the ballroom, seeing the faces of employees who had been his colleagues for years. Some showed pity, others disgust, but most just seemed relieved that the truth had finally come to light. With his shoulders slumped and his head bowed, Michael walked toward the exit, flanked by the security guards. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the silent room until the doors closed behind him with a definitive click. The silence that followed lasted for several seconds before Patricia Vance began to applaud slowly. Her applause was followed by Mary Ellen Reynolds, then by Rob Green, and gradually by everyone present, until the entire ballroom erupted in an ovation that recognized not only Grace's courage, but also the professionalism with which she had handled an extraordinarily difficult situation. Edward took the microphone again to address the audience. "What you have witnessed tonight demonstrates Morgan Construction's absolute commitment to integrity and transparency. No employee, regardless of their position, is above our core values." The applause continued. Grace carefully placed all the documents back in the briefcase. Her work for the night was done, but she knew the coming days and weeks would bring formal investigations, legal depositions, and the complete restructuring of the finance department. "Grace," Edward said, approaching her, "I hope that after this demonstration of professionalism, we have no doubts about your ability to lead the full audit of our operations. It will be an honor to work for a company that truly values transparency over convenience," she replied with a genuine smile. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne glasses, offering one to each of them. Grace took a glass and raised it slightly, preparing to make a toast that would definitively seal this extraordinary night. "To the truth," she said, her clear voice reaching every corner of the room. "The only companion that never disappoints and always arrives on time for every important appointment." The phrase sparked genuine laughter and applause among the guests, who perfectly understood the reference to her final words to Michael. Grace had brought the only +1 to the party that truly mattered: the truth about her husband's actions. As she clinked glasses with Edward and the other executives, Grace felt a sense of liberation she hadn't experienced in years. The woman who had stayed in the shadows for so long had finally found her voice, her power, and her place in the professional world. 6 months later, Michael Sullivan was facing criminal charges for corporate fraud and embezzlement. His CPA license had been permanently revoked, and his chances of finding employment in the financial sector were practically nil. The apartment in Greenwich Village had been vacated, the jewelry had been confiscated as evidence, and Sophia had disappeared from his life as quickly as she had appeared. Grace, on the other hand, had established herself as one of the most respected auditors in the country. Her work at Morgan Construction had resulted in the implementation of transparency systems that became a model for other companies in the sector. Her corner office on the executive floor had a panoramic view of the city that reminded her daily of how far she had come since that night at the Plaza Hotel. The story of the holiday party where the CFO was unmasked by his own wife became a corporate legend, told and retold in business schools as an example of how integrity always triumphs over corruption, no matter how long it takes for the truth to come to light. And whenever someone asked Grace how she had felt that night, publicly confronting her unfaithful and corrupt husband, She would smile with the same serenity she had shown in the ballroom and reply with the words that had become her personal trademark. "I just brought the one guest he was truly afraid of, the truth."